Hi, everyone. This is going to be a panel or discussion about activists and people of color in the climate movement. And so I'm going to just get started by doing introductions. So I am Fiona Jarvis. I'm a 15-year-old climate activist in New York City, and I work with Extinction Rebellion Youth.
Hi, my name is Krissy Mays. I am one of the co-coordinators for Extinction Rebellion Youth Charlotte.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Leung. I am a 16-year-old climate activist and organizer based in New York City, and I work with Extinction Rebellion Youth in New York City, and I'm excited to be part of this discussion.
Woo! Okay. So I want to get the ball rolling in this discussion, asking you guys about where do you guys find the line, the defining differences between what is tokenization and what is, reasonable representation of diversity. Because obviously, the climate movement has really, unfortunately, been whitewashed. And so, yeah, it's important to have an increased amount of diversity, but also, where does it cross the line of just becoming pick and choose tokenization? So, yeah, I'm interested to hear your guys' opinions.
So I think the difference between just representation and tokenization is the way that the media interacts with the activists, because I definitely think that although there are a couple of POC just sprinkled in the media as activists, I genuinely don't think that a lot of these reporters or even the people that have the authority and power to listen to these people and take action, I don't think that they're literally just listening to what these POC activists are talking to them about. Because for some reason, even when we do have activists of color talking about their own experiences, why we need more POC involved in the movement, and why their own communities are being affected, and why there needs to be action, people aren't actually listening. They're not taking what they're saying into account, and they're not using what they're saying to kind of catalyze another movement. And it's really outrageous, because even when we do have, for example, in my experience being Asian American, I see one or two Asian American activists, and they don't necessarily look like me, and there are certain points that are still imperative that are expressed in the Asian American community. For example, there's anti-Blackness and there's discrimination because in Asia, especially East Asia, there's so much homogeny, and it's because of that there's a lot of this closed-mindedness that still needs to be addressed, but no one's talking about that yet. And we need media to be working with people that actually have important opinions so that it's addressed and that it's being taken seriously by society.
Mm-hmm. They're not just faces and bodies who can be used hey, we have a person of color, they're people, they're real people. Yeah.
100%. And I think that's a great point. I feel POC people, if you're POC, you get hired to do POC stuff. It's not just regular stuff. They're oh, well, you kind of become that token 100%. And the media goes to you as that, oh, that's that one Black person we know who can speak about this, or that's that one Asian American we know that can speak about that. And that becomes such an issue because you have a lot more to speak on. Of course, we care about the things that are happening in our community, but that shouldn't be the only thing that people look to us for. And so I think that becomes a huge part with tokenization in the media, especially. I think that the roles that we are given, sometimes they have a title, but we don't always have the power behind it. And that's a really big deal if the strings that are still being pulled are by a board that are fully white, but the media is seeing us as the person who's making the decision. It also kind of skews the view of the movement and who's involved. And I think that's what a lot of people don't notice. And even being in it, you may not realize it at the time, because it's this really kind of awkward, weird thing to just be am I being used for my like intellectual abilities and like people understand that I really am educated about what I'm talking about, or am I being used because like my skin color or like where my parents are from or like just my background. And I think that's such a weird place to be in the movement, and something that definitely needs to be addressed more often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And kind of branching off of that, I guess I want to ask you guys, do you guys think that there is a homogenous experience of people of color, of activists of color? Because obviously there's so many different places and cultures and communities that people come from, but like, yeah, I guess I want to know what you guys think we have in common. Do you think that there's a string that ties us all together?
Mm-hmm. So from my experience, I definitely do not think that just because you are POC, you have a homogenous experience. Because, for example, although we do all live in this one oppressive structure that was created by white men, capitalism, and colonialism, we do all have our own privileges. Like, for example, I'm East Asian. I do not have the same experiences as someone who is South Asian, someone who is Muslim American, someone who is African American, Black American, Latinx American. And I do need to acknowledge my own privileges. And by acknowledging my privilege, I can also utilize it to raise awareness about other important issues. Like, I don't see, for example, Asian Americans fighting for Black Lives Matter. I don't see more Asian Americans in the climate movement, and it's really problematic, or at least the media is not covering enough Asian Americans. And is there a reason why the media isn't covering enough POC activists? I genuinely think that sometimes we do need POC solidarity and we need POC unification, but I don't think the media is going to be working with activists like us to be actually taking and using this information and create systemic change. And in fact, I definitely think media has enough power to do that. Because, for example, in the Nixonian administration, they used media to vilify and criminalize African American men. And that's the reason why there's mass incarceration of Black men in this society. So media does have enough power. And if the media isn't working with us, then they're part of the problem. They're complacent and they have power, but they're just sticking to the status quo.
Yes. Yes. I 100% agree with everything that Cynthia said. I think that media plays such a huge role, and everybody does have like their own unique experiences. I definitely don't face the same discrimination that Cynthia would face or that my white counterparts would face. And that's okay to a certain degree. I definitely believe that we should have some solidarity, and it's okay that we don't have the same experience, because that is what makes us like unique, and what we have to bring to the table is different from each other. And I think that media plays a large role in who is able to be seen, and these activists who are people of color are out there. It's not like they just don't exist. There's so many of them, and it's sad that we don't have names for all of them. And it's so easy to name off the top of my head a few white activists that I could tell you, but if somebody, yes, so it would be easy for me to name a few white activists off the top of my head, but if somebody was like, please name like 5 Latinx and 5 Asian American and maybe even 5 Black American like climate activists, I would struggle, and that's embarrassing, honestly, and that has partially to do with my lack of knowledge, and I didn't go out and really research that information, but also it's so readily and easily available for us to see white activists. Like, the media should have them out there at the forefront, because they're just as important. What they're saying is just as loud as any white activist, and it has just as much power. So I think I think we do not have that kind of universal experience completely, but we definitely have things that tie us all together.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it's also, especially, like, the thing is, what you were saying is like, activists of color, what we have to say or what they have to say is just as important as white activists. I would argue that it's potentially, like, in some situations it's more more valuable just because of the nature of the climate crisis. We call it climate justice because the climate crisis disproportionately affects people of color and communities of color. So it's embarrassing, and it's not responsible almost for the media to not give the same or even more representation to activists of color in this movement.
I agree. I think that is embarrassing, and something that they should be ashamed of, and something that they should be actively working towards. And there are journalists who are people of color. I think that they should be especially focusing on their own communities at some point, and really advocating for them and making sure that our voices are heard just as much. I'm sure they have struggles within their own industry, but knowing that struggle, it would kind of make you think that they would want to reach out and make sure that these other communities were also being involved in and having a voice in what was happening as well.
And sometimes too, I feel like there is a very clear distinction between academia and just the normal type of media that we do see in the news. And it doesn't need to be that large divide, because, for example, let's say like COVID-19 with the Chinese virus. The media would cover like, okay, this is the Chinese virus is just saying Chinese virus is bad. But no one really covers like why saying the Chinese virus is bad. And it doesn't need to, like, we don't need like academics, and we don't need academia explaining why saying the Chinese virus is bad. It's just bad because like associating a virus with an ethnicity is bad in the first place. And so it's just I just don't think that media, for like in some examples, they really don't explain certain situations with more context. They don't contextualize certain information and communicate it to the public. They just take such situations and they manipulate their viewers or their audience, and that's just it. Like, they don't contextualize information, and it really, like, as a POC, as someone who's Asian, it really, like, excuse my language, it pisses me off, because I don't think that I'm being treated as someone, like, as an actual person. I think they just see me as another group that is marginalized by society, and it's annoying as hell.
Definitely, dude. Kind of moving into a different subject, I want to ask you guys, because obviously all three of us work primarily with XR, Extinction Rebellion, and it was founded in the UK, and it's like official. It's like primary, I guess, like principle, or no, not its primary principle. Like its biggest action that it's seen is like the arrestable action, and that's like a really, really fascinating, just, I guess, concept when you bring in the discussion of people of color, of activists of color, because obviously the UK is very different than the US, but there is like a universal history of the neglect and abuse given to people of color by police and by administrations. So I want to ask you guys how you feel about like the focus that's put on the arrestable actions of XR, especially since we're all youth. And I know that there has been some distinctions between XR youth and XR adults in terms of how we focus on arrestable actions.
So I feel like even XR adults, they see the end goal of joining XR is to be arrested, which is extremely problematic, because even in the UK, there are issues with police brutality. Like, I saw this article about how South Asians and Black people in the UK also have issues with police brutality. And in the US, we definitely have issues with police brutality. And there's privilege to being able to take part in direct action. And in my sociology class, we were talking about how in XR, they use direct action, and they make sure that big names are arrested, so that it's almost like they're spreading awareness to kind of support marginalized communities. But in reality, from an ethic perspective, if you don't know what XR is, it seems like a bunch of just privileged kids just getting arrested, being really like oblivious that there are communities that can take part in direct action, which like I think that XR could, like adults could also address. But again, when we are allowed to take part in direct action and when we are allowed to get arrested, we have to acknowledge our privileges. And again, like there should be like different outlets for POC to engage in climate activism that aren't just getting arrested. And that's what XR really needs to address, because this movement, even in some areas, well, in many areas, I would say, it's still not inclusive. It excludes certain people. And it's not right at all, because especially if we want more people to join this movement, we have to start changing our different ways.
I agree, and I think that it's difficult to an extent because XR is so decentralized. So with that that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome for some purposes, and in others it's really hard because not everybody is getting the same amount of training, not everybody is getting the same amount of knowledge, and we're all coming from very different areas and backgrounds. I know for Charlotte, when we planned our first kind of arrestable action, we went in with our eyes like closed pretty much. Like we did not have an NVDA training that addressed like this action is not going to look the same for every person, and that if you're a person of color you may be treated differently. It wasn't until our second oh, no, after our first arrestable action, which was not successful, we were not arrested at all, no police came to us at all. We had an MBDA training, and Ollie and I just kind of sat there with our mouths to the ground because we were like, how could we be so ignorant and not see this issue and like present it to everybody before we even allowed somebody to like join in an action that could have been arrestable. And in that NVDA training, we talked about, of course, discrimination and how everybody is treated differently. But more than that, we had like actual real life examples. And that week, a woman had been arrested who was a Black female, and she was the only Black female who was with the group. And there were over 15 people, and she was arrested. She had been hit in the face with a megaphone by a member of the KKK, and she was bleeding. And she bled on a police officer, and they charged her for bleeding on a police officer. Put her in jail. Her bond was, her bail was $10,000. Everybody else's was $1,000, and there was no reason for that other than her being a Black female. And it was shocking to me that that we could have put our members in that type of situation without ever being like aware of how dangerous it was. And so I definitely think that's something that everybody needs to be educated on, and it's something that we can't close our eyes to, and we need to focus on. So yeah, I think it's important not only to educate ourselves, but to educate the public along with our working group members to make sure that we can keep them as safe as possible, and to make sure that we have like resources that can like really educate them on like the nature of the situation and not like shield them from the truth, because that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of how this one time, when I did work on my Vice article, I mentioned a little bit about direct action and police brutality, and I remember showing it to one of these other kids that I went to school with, and I remember him saying like, "Oh, I don't think that police brutality was going to actually happen during September 20th, even though we know for a fact there were going to be crowds of students near the NYPD," and it just showed how privileged certain kids are, that they do not have to fear or really contextualize that police brutality is a very true thing in society. And
Mm-hmm.
even just hearing that, it infuriated me, because it just showed how ignorant and almost insensitive for someone for someone to be that way, to say that.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like it's like obviously the media should be doing its equal part of, like you said, Krissy, like educating people, but it's also like obviously there's a lack of representation or of awareness on their part, and so like we as activists, as youth, as people of color, like I feel like we kind of have to really like centralize that type of information, that those types of resources, so that, like you said, Cynthia, like there's not uneducated kids in New York City, which is like ridiculous. It's ridiculous that a city like New York City that has so much diversity still has ignorant people in it. But so yeah, I guess kind of wrapping up now. Yeah, do you guys, both, either of you, like I know that I also want to quickly mention, because Cynthia just mentioned that she has a Vice article about being an activist of color in the climate movement, which is really interesting, and you should read it up. You should read it, search it up and read it. And my mom is here. Okay. Since Cynthia mentioned it quickly, like you should definitely read. She has an article on Vice about being an activist of color in the climate movement. And then yeah, I guess that pretty much sums it up. If any of you guys have anything else to say or anything to plug.
I think just XR in general, it's honestly a great organization to be a part of. I think there's so much community that happens here, and although we have these issues, it's awesome to be able to have a platform to talk about it. And I think that speaks highly of the people that we work with and the organization as a whole, because it would be a completely different story if this was occurring and nobody was even talking about it. So I appreciate having the platform, and thank you for watching this panel. And it was great getting to meet you guys and, create this rapport and relationship. So that was really nice.
Mm-hmm. And so if you guys want, viewers or whatever, if you want to follow XR Youth NYC, has an Instagram account. It's XR Youth.NYC. And yeah, we have a lot of discussions about POC as well. Oh, the US account. Yeah, we also have XR Youth U.S. I think that's the.
And we also have XR Youth Charlotte, which is XR Youth Charlotte.
Okay, that's it. Okay, thank you guys all so much.
Wait,
are you Cynthia? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say before this discussion ended that at this point we do need POC solidarity and unity, especially because if we do want this social change, if we do want systemic change, we all need to work together, because a lot of these issues again are created by colonialism and capitalism, and this goes along with climate change. And so we all need to really work together, point out the flaws and call out all the different flaws and racism and colorism that's in all of our communities, especially being Asian American, so that we can all work together and see everyone at the same type of level or scale, and just see each other as other individuals. So yeah, we really need that right now, because I feel like we're all kind of just very separated and torn apart. So that was a message that I think was really needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so this is a great conversation. So I guess goodbye for now.
Bye. Thank you.